Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment and today's live show, coming live to you from London, sunny London, live, yes. Have I said that already?
But are we live, Mark?
Are we live? It says live in the top left-hand corner there. So yes, we are. Welcome everyone. And we've decided to spend the summer solstice, the most wonderful summer evening night of the year, stuck inside a cubicle at Hachette. But with me, to tide me over, is the wonderful, and I never get your surname right, so I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to run up to this. I'm going to say Amber Caravéo.
Oh, that was brilliant.
Was that good?
That was very impressive.
That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And in doing so, I've completely forgotten to mention our wonderful sponsor, Scrivener. Scrivener is the official writing app of the Bestseller Experiment. It's the app that Mr. DeVoe and I used to write our Kindle bestseller, Back to Reality, and it can be yours, dear listener, for 20% off. Just pop over to literatureandlatte.com, tell them we sent you. Use the code BestsellerXP and you'll get 20% off, and we love it. Amber, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Mark?
I'm tickety-boo. I've got this long thing where I could introduce Amber, but I've got a very short one. I've got a little note from Kate Harrison, who we've had on the show, actually. And when we put up that we were going to have you on the show, she said, "Oh, this is so going to be worth listening to. Amber is an absolute star. I learned so much working with her." Amber used to be an editorial director at Orion Children's Books. You've worked for Random House Children's Books as well. You worked for Working Partners, where you worked on stuff like Rainbow Magic. You've worked with authors like Liz Kessler, Caroline Lawrence, Holly Black, Emily Murdoch. You've worked with half of the SAS, Andy McNabb, Chris Ryan, Bear Grylls. It's an incredible career, so we are delighted to have you here today.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. And we've got all sorts of wonderful people joining us on the live show. So we've got Ink and Sage. Hello, Ink and Sage. Now,
Pernilla,
Sage,
I think I know her.
Yes, Pernilla Hughes. Yes, she's just signed with Harper.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. And Belle and Ink and Sage. Ink and Sage, I think, is in South Africa, and she's worrying about a power cut. So hang in there. And Jack Logan, bonjour to you as well. Now, if it's okay with you, we're going to start with some listener questions.
Great.
And if you live folks who are all our Patreon chart topper supporters, so if you want to get in on this next time round, check out patreon.com/bestseller experiment, and you can find out how you can join in and get in and get some live questions. I've got questions from Robin Sarti. Robin says, "I've got a couple of children's picture books in the works, but I'm having trouble figuring out what age group they are for. Any guidelines or tips for targeting the correct age group?"
Well, it can be tricky. I think the best thing to do, and the easiest thing to do really, is go out and read, look at what's on the market. I mean, it really helps inform your own writing to see what's selling and what's doing well. Length is a big factor. Most picture books should be between sort of 500, 750 words, something like that, around that length, and possibly up to 1,000 words. If it's longer than that, it's heading into sort of what we call early reader territory. So keep it short if you're writing a picture book. Picture flats are very popular, really successful, lovely format, but the text is very simple and it works closely with the illustration content. So that's why you need to keep words to a minimum.
There's been a lot of back and forth on age ranging, because I know it's something that a lot of authors kind of resist, some publishers resist.
Yes.
Yet when you go to Amazon, they're very strict on their age ranges, aren't they? Where do you stand in the middle of this?
I am really divided on this. Personally, I'm not keen on age ranging because I think anyone can read anything and enjoy it, and I feel very strongly that we shouldn't be defining people by what they read, and I hate this thing of saying, "Oh, you can't read that, it's too young for you." You know, so I'm against age ranging for that reason, and most readers will find the books that they love and they don't need an age range to help them do it. However, for parents, for grandparents, for people buying presents, it is really useful. And I think the problem is that because we don't typically put age ranging on all the books. Often people buy other presents, toys, which do come with an age range on them, and it's nice and clear, and it's very easy to work out what's for your little niece or nephew age 5 or 10 or whatever. And I think that it means that often parents, grandparents move away from books in favour of other kinds of toys, which is a shame because we all want our kids to read and read more.
What's the solution?
I really don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I suspect that the readers themselves, the kids, probably pay no attention to age ranging anyway. So there about five, maybe 10, God, makes me feel old, years ago now, there was a big push to put age ranging on all books, and all the publishers got together and decided we were all going to age range. And at that time, I was very much against it. I've sort of changed my view on that now. I kind of think maybe it's a good idea because I think the kids pay no attention anyway. And actually, it's really helpful for those older people who don't know what to buy. So I've come a bit full circle on it.
Yeah, I mean, I look after Amazon here, and we don't do kids books as such in Orion. Orion Children's do. It's a separate company, but we do the odd YA book.
Sure. And
they're very strict on
really
how these things, because they are all about the customer. They're all about steering, and there will be adult customers. There won't be kids on Amazon
who don't necessarily know. And if you're buying for someone else, it is a hurdle because you don't want to get the wrong thing or buy them something that's too old or too young. So actually, I think age ranging is quite helpful. I don't think it should be plastered all over the book. I mean, somewhere small and discreet seems like a good idea.
Yeah. But of course, when you're writing, you have an idea of the market that you're writing for, the age group that you're writing for. When you're writing, say, for example, for picture books, what sort of language should you be using? I mean, keeping it simple, I guess?
Generally, yeah, keep it simple. Obviously, you can play with language, but try and play with it in a way that's not too challenging, that's very accessible, that's fun, that kids will really be able to understand. You can make up words. I mean, kids are incredibly creative and they'll be very on board with your creativity. So, you don't have to hold back too much, but just bear in mind that they're young, they're just learning to read. They'll maybe be reading these with parents, or maybe if it's a picture book, starting to try and read it on their own. So keep it accessible. Don't put really, really long, complicated, obscure words in there that they're going to struggle with, because they will switch off and put your book down and move on to something else. So,
I think the same applies to adults, frankly.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
But then you've got Roald Dahl inventing words like snozwanglers,
which is fantastic, and I'm all for that, and Jabberwocky and all these wonderful, wonderful creative things, and kids are really on board with that. And look at things like Teletubbies, where they speak a completely fictitious language, and kids are fine with that. They've got no problem with that. They still understand everything that's going on. And obviously, of course, the joy of a picture book is you have got the strong illustrative content as well. So, you can afford to be playful, but just keep it simple.
I suppose there's a rule that we have in screenwriting, which when you're writing, say, a voiceover, the voiceover should never reflect what's on the screen. It should be in juxtaposition to what's on the screen. So, if the voiceover is saying, well, I got up and I brushed my teeth, and you cut someone brushing their teeth, it makes it completely redundant. Is that a kind of rule that you might apply to writing picture books?
Yes, I think that is absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, it's about the words and the artwork working together. So you don't want to just spell out what's already happening in the pictures. The one needs to add to and elaborate on the other. And that's why, people tend to think picture book writing is easy because it's short and it's simple. It is not easy. It is an incredible skill, because it is about thinking how your words are going to interact with the artwork, and that calls for skill from the author and also, of course, from the illustrator when they are then interpreting the book and so on. But yes, it's an interesting point. I've never thought of it in those terms before, but yes, you absolutely don't want to just be recreating the pictures.
And of course, when we say rules, these are principles. They're not rules. They're not hard and fast rules. We've got more and more people joining us. Oh, brilliant. Batjutsu is with us today. Hello, sir. And everyone's talking about their dinner. Look, here we go. Look, Batjutsu, I managed to get some food made for the wife and myself, now eating and watching. Hello.
Oh, that sounds great.
Digest your food properly. Don't rush it on our account. And Incan Sage says, I got supper for hubby and myself done not 5 minutes before this started. And Belle then says, husband cooked lunch and now he's heading for work while I'm watching. I'm really hungry now.
I know. It's not fair. Bring some of it over here.
Thank you, Robin, for your questions. We have another question from Craig here. Craig says, if you're pitching an illustrated story, do you get the illustrations before? or would you wait to be matched with an illustrator by a publisher?
It varies. Generally, you would wait to be matched, unless you are we have some wonderful, Jamie Little is a good example, illustrators who can also write. And then obviously they're envisaging the whole thing together and they're creating it as a whole package. So that's a bit different. But if you are an author and you're not illustrating yourself, then I would advise you wait and let the publisher match your work with an illustrator, because they will probably have quite strong ideas about what they like and what they don't like in terms of illustration style and what they feel will work for the market. And if you create something that you like and they don't happen to like that artwork style, there's the possibility that they'll reject your book not because of the text, but because they don't happen to love that artwork. So publishers are very used to taking a text and creating the artwork for it. So that's fine. Create your text, obviously with the visuals in mind, and then let the publisher find the illustrator.
So when an author is submitting a book to yourself or to a publisher, should they say have a blank page and just say illustration to go here and maybe give a description of the illustration at that stage?
Yeah, very brief description, because part of it is letting the illustrator do their job and bring their own interpretation to the words. That's why it's so important to have a good author-illustrator matchup. So yes, absolutely, give an idea of what you have in your mind, but don't be too prescriptive. So a brief kind of nudge in the right direction is what you're looking for.
And the standard of illustrators these days is incredible. So unless you're at the same standard, I wouldn't advise. No, don't try and illustrate your own work. That way, disaster lies, especially if you're anything like me when it comes to drawing. I mean, the standard, as you've said, of illustration is phenomenal. We are blessed with some terrific illustrators, so let them do their job and you do yours and focus on the words and get that working brilliantly. I'm a great believer in everyone playing to their own strengths. Yes, and of course, the other thing is these people are professionals. They work to deadlines very well. They work to they will deliver to a standard that will be print ready and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and they know all the right ways to create the stuff. Often they're doing it electronically on a computer anyway. So yeah. And
being mercenary for a minute, what's the split between author and illustrator on a book?
Well, again, it varies. We don't actually represent pitch books.
Right.
So it's not an area that I have to do a lot of work in. It is an area that we might branch out into at some point. And publishers vary, and also, sometimes happily we're moving away from this now, but sometimes artwork has also been commissioned on a flat fee basis.
Right.
And that has been a great shame, and I think we are seeing a great movement now, which is really pleasing, where illustrators are getting far more recognition for their work, publishers are giving them royalty as it should be, especially things like, for picture books it's always been more that way. It's some of the older books where we get onto early readers or young fiction where the artwork has sometimes been done on a flat fee basis. But pleasingly, I do think that that's changing a lot. And now we see far more often illustrators getting credited properly on the cover, in launch announcements, on Twitter. People are much more savvy about the role of the illustrator.
Yeah, rightly so too. The thing I missed in your introduction, of course, is having been an editor and worked with all these amazing authors, you are now an agent with the Skylark Literary Agent. That's your agency. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, that was really exciting and slightly terrifying. I left Orion, where I was very, very happy. I was the editorial director, working on the list there, and it was joy, and it was a joy, and it was a fantastic list. But I really missed. I came from a background of working for very small creative companies like Working Partners, where I had much more involvement in the creation of the project and the stories and the storylines, and I missed working with the authors that closely. Obviously, as an editor at Orion, I was still working closely with authors, but the more senior you get in this business as an editor, the more removed you become, in fact, from that. And the more concerned you are with strategy, with profit and loss, with budgets, this kind of thing, the sort of paperwork, the finance side of it. And that was not my great love. I like working with the authors and I like the creative side. So I really wanted to get back to that. So I had a chat with a friend of mine, Joanna, who I had worked with previously back in the day. And she was very keen also to set up an agency. And we decided to set up Skylark. We'd seen there are a lot of terrific agents out there. But then, there are some others that are not so honest or reliable. And we felt we could do a really good job. And we wanted to help new talent to get discovered. Most of the authors on our list are debut authors.
Right.
We're really keen to find new talent within the children's world. Not necessarily big brands, celebrities, that kind of thing, but actually people who just write great books for children.
Okay.
That's our passion. So that's how Skylark was born. And that's what we've been doing ever since, and it's been amazing.
Oh, did you hear that, listeners? Debut talent, that could be you.
Your books.
We have a question from Ink and Sage. How important is chemistry between an author and an agent? That's a great question, actually, isn't it? Because I don't want to mention any names, but I've gone through agents like the phone book,
Yeah.
and there are agents or managers in Los Angeles who, when you saw the email or you saw the phone, you kind of were dreading that call. You don't want that sort of relationship, do you?
It's really important that you can talk to your agent. It's really important that you have a great relationship, that it's friendly but also professional. But most of all, that you feel you can talk to them. Very occasionally, I think on the whole, most agents, children's publishing on the whole is a lovely industry to work in. Most publishers, editors, agents are all lovely people. So, thankfully we don't hear too many horror stories, but we do hear every now and then somebody will say, oh, my agent's always too busy to speak to me. Or, when I phone my agent, I can tell that they're just keen to get off the phone as quickly as possible. I think that's a really bad sign. I think you need to feel that you can phone your agent if you need to, that you can talk to them, that they've got time for you, that they're interested in listening to you. Obviously, you don't want to be phoning them every day.
No.
That's going to drive anybody mad. But, you do need to feel that you can pick up the phone and chat to them about anything that's concerning you. That's what they're there for. So I would say that chemistry element is really important. And that's the one thing we always advise authors to look for when they're looking for an agent, is find an agent that you click with, that you get on well with. You could be with that agent, hopefully, potentially, for the entirety of your career. So it's really vital.
Yeah, it's from an author's point of view, it's always difficult to know how often you can drop them a line without being a hassle. But my friend John Wright, who directed Robot Overlords, we were talking recently, and he used a brilliant phrase, which is, be the squeaky hinge.
Yeah.
Which is, don't be a pain in the bum and email them every day and just be annoying. But if something needs attention, then by all means, drop them a line, say, can this be fixed? Can this be sorted? Can you help me with this? And what I found is when if you hold back and just wait for something to be fixed, and it just doesn't get fixed. But if you give someone a nudge, then they'll put it on their to-do list. Does that sound right to you? That
sounds absolutely right to me. And we say this to our authors all the time. Don't be afraid to contact your editor if you've got a concern or you want to talk to them about something. Your editor in your publishing house is your contact for your publisher, and they are 9 times out of 10 delighted to talk to you. So do get in touch with them. Likewise, if sales, marketing have promised something or have said, oh, we're looking into this or going to do this for your book, and you don't hear anything and you think, oh, is that happening? Get in touch and ask, because the trouble is, this is true for agents and publishers. We're all busy people and we have more than one author that we're looking after. And publishers too have lots of books that they're having to look after all at once. So it's very easy for them to be so busy that if you're not there saying, oh, by the way, what's happening with that? It's easy for it to get forgotten with the best will in the world, with no, malicious intent. People just are busy. So don't be afraid to say, oh, you did mention that you were going to be creating bookmarks for me. When can I expect to see those bookmarks? Or, whatever it may be. And likewise with your agent, don't be afraid to pick up the phone or drop them an email. The squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Right.
So you don't want to be such a pain that nobody wants to speak to you anymore and people sort of run away when they see you coming and say, we don't want to work with them anymore because they are so difficult. But just asking a question in an email or, picking up the phone is not an owner, you know, it's fine.
Particularly with debut authors as well, because I mean, I've been working in books for a quarter of a century now, and you know, we assume that people know a lot more than they actually do. So by all means, come forward with the stupid questions. Inverted commas.
We always say there's no question too stupid or too small. You know, that we want all these questions. It is when you've been working in an industry for a very long time, as both of us have, you don't even realise how much you know.
Yeah.
You take so much of it for granted, and it's only when somebody, you know, you'd be chatting away talking about HBPB, you know, whatever, and someone will suddenly go, what's a PB or TPB? And you're like, oh, I hadn't realised, of course, paperback, trade paperback. You know, these stupid little things where you just don't think, because we're all so, you know, it's ingrained in us. So yes, I mean, don't ever be afraid to ask the question. And again, your agent shouldn't make you feel at all awkward or silly about asking those things.
Yeah.
That's why you have an agent, because they have the knowledge that you don't have.
Conversely, if you have an author who comes in with a very clear idea of what they want, if they come in and say, you know what, I want to be a number one bestseller, or I want to win awards, or I want to do a load of school events, if they have a very clear idea, you want to hear that too?
Yes, within reason. I mean, we take it for granted that everyone would like to be a number one bestseller and win awards. You know, we kind of assume that most people are going to want that. I do think it is quite unhelpful sometimes when authors come to us and they say, oh, I've got a marketing plan and I've got, you know, publishers don't like to be told how to market your book. They have marketing teams for that very job who have spent a lot of time becoming very skilled and knowing what kind of marketing will work best for your book in that market. So really, they want to be left alone to do their job. They are very, very happy if you have ideas and you're enthusiastic and you're happy to collaborate with them and share those ideas and discuss with them, but you cannot, you know, dictate or try and push them in a certain direction. You know, it's their job to do what's best for your book. Sometimes they don't have the budget. I'm sure most marketing teams will say they don't have the budget that they might like. No. So then they will be very happy if you've got some creative ideas and are happy to put some work in and help them with the marketing. So that's always very welcome. But let them, you know, discuss with you, let them instigate the discussion rather than rushing in with a whole plan.
Yeah, good advice. I've got some more superb questions coming. Go on from Jack Logan. How important is it that the protagonist of the story are a similar age to the reader? For example, will you have a teen book without any teens in it?
Very unlikely. I'd never say never, because as soon as you say, oh, well, you can't do this or that, somebody does it in such a brilliant and clever and amazingly different way that it works brilliantly, and it then becomes the next big thing and everyone's talking about it. Having said that, it would be very unlikely to be successful if it was a teen book with no teens in it. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, we always say the protagonist of the book should be at the upper end of your target audience. So if you're writing a book for 9 to 12s, the hero or heroine would usually be 12 or 13. If you're writing a book for 7 to 9s, they'd be 9 or 10. If you're writing a book for a YA novel, then they will be sort of 17. And if it's teen, then 14, 15, you know. So there are these rules of thumb. They are not rules. You can break them, and people do with great success. But be aware that when you break a rule, you are making it that much harder for your book to do well in the marketplace. It's not to say it can't, but you're putting more pressure on your book to be brilliant in other ways, to kind of compensate for that naughtiness.
And that idea of putting them at the upper age limit, is that kind of an aspirational thing?
It's entirely aspirational, because all of us like to read about somebody who's kind of a bit better, we think, than ourselves. And of course, for kids, it's all about being older. You know, what kid doesn't want to be older? I mean, I can remember when I was little, for some reason, 14 was the magic age, and I was desperate to get to 14. Seems a long time ago now. But yes, so kids always want to read about somebody a little bit older. So that's why it's always the top end of the target audience. So it's aspiration.
It's funny, we discovered that when we were casting Robot Overlords. We did a screen test for the protagonist, now who we had written him as about 15 years old, and we got a kid in who was 15 years old, and he was perfectly good in the role, but the producers made the point that the same point you made, which is kids aspire upwards.
Yes.
And so we cast Callum McAuliffe, who's old, I think he was about 18, 19 when we filmed, but he looked younger.
Yeah.
But he had that, he just carried himself in a different way. And we have 4 kids in the film, the youngest of whom, Milo, was about 11 or 12 at the time, but looked young. And of course, all the young kids latch on to him, you know, so everyone had a kid in the gang that they could kind of latch onto. You know?
Yeah, and that's what you're aiming for with any book, you know, to speak to your audience, because basically kids want to live the adventure through the protagonist. That's what you're aiming for when you write any book, is to really sell the experience, so that when you're reading the book, you can experience the adventure vicariously through those characters. And that's why I think we've seen so many first-person narratives coming out in recent years, because it just makes it that little bit easier for the reader and the protagonist to merge, to resonate with each other. And I think that's what readers are looking for. And it's true for adult novels as well, you know, in a slightly different way. And third-person close perspective can work really well too, and still is very successful. But it's all about drawing your reader into the book as much as you can, so that they feel they're really living that experience. Yeah.
Fantastic. There's some conversation from the live gang talking about agents and stuff. Belle says, along the same lines, what type of things should one look for in an agent? And then Incan says, good question, Belle. So you're having their own conversation.
Yes,
how should authors interview agents? It seems a rather lot like dating. Have you ever ever felt interviewed?
Yes, I have. I have really felt interviewed sometimes, actually. And that's no bad thing. I mean, but actually I would say try not to make it so much of an interview, because what you really want to do is get to know them. So you want it to be relaxed chat. Just, you know, if you're in the lucky position of having several agents who are all interested in working with you, meet with them all if you can, in person if that's feasible, or talk on the phone if it's not, but chat with them all and just see how you get on. And I'm sure you will get a vibe, you know, from all of them, but you will get a sense for who you can most easily work with.
Yeah.
And different agents have different styles of working as well, so it's good to get a sense of, you know, how different agents like to work. And we're quite editorial, so you know, that's something to think about, is how much editorial input do you want? You know, some authors are much more open and keen to have that than others, and there are agents who don't work in that way. So, you know, you have got a choice, you've got options, so think about that.
Excellent. Belle makes a point. She says marketing, it's very interesting, because a lot of children's book publishers I looked up said they wanted marketing information in the submissions letter. That sounds a bit odd, doesn't it?
Yes.
She later says it could be an outlier, but that's not very common, is it?
That is not very common. I'm not sure who that would be.
Yeah.
And it sounds very unusual to me.
Yeah.
I wonder whether it's perhaps, I don't know, a small press or a vanity publisher who are hoping that you're going to, you know, do the work for them, so they'll make more money from your book. I honestly, I don't know, but it is unusual. I don't think you would find that with the major trade publishers.
Yeah. Belle continues, she says, do all agents have access to all publishers? How do you know if your agent has the right connections? And that's a good one, isn't it? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I fondly imagine that all agents do have access to all publishers, but I don't actually know if that's true, because I was a publisher. I came from that background and I had that set of connections already. So I already had a lot of friends at the companies I'd worked with, and just friends who were editors at other companies, because children's publishing is a very, very small world and we all kind of know each other. So I just already knew all these people, which is one of the lovely things about my job. I think, generally speaking, if your agent is a good agent, I'm sure they will have, because most editors are very open. They're keen to meet new agents. They're keen to find, you know, that we're all looking for great books. Editors are all looking for great books. So they will be very willing to open their door to a new agent and meet a new agent. So unless your agent has been sleeping under a stone somewhere, I'm sure that they will have made contact with all these editors. And, you know, So, I mean, how you know whether they've got contacts, again, chat to them, ask them, you know, who do they, you know, have they got ideas for who they think would be suitable for your book? And see what they say, and find out a little bit about their background and what they've done and what their history is, and you will soon get a sense. I mean, you know, have they always been an agent? Did they come up through maybe as an agent working for another agency as an assistant, and then they built their own list and so on? Or were they, like me, you know, previously an editor who's chosen to go into agent? And there's lots of different paths, but by talking to them, and this is why it's so important to meet or chat on the phone, you will get a sense.
Yeah, I mean, in the first instance, it will most likely be on their website. I mean, I got your biography off your website, so it's all there in great detail, which is terrific.
Yeah, the internet's a great tool.
Some more excellent questions. Incan Sage says, I'm not sure if this is an agent question or an editor question, but how important is it to have an elevator pitch?
It is not vital, but it is very, very useful. So you never know when you might suddenly find yourself in a situation where being able to roll out that elevator pitch is really useful to you. The other thing is that if you can come up with a really strong elevator pitch, it will immediately grab the attention of any agents that you're sending your manuscript to. So that's immediately hooking them and getting them interested. And if it's really good, they will then use it when they are sending out to publishers. I recently signed an author who had written a really brilliantly funny book, and I've just sent it out. We think about how best to, you know, sell the book in and how best to encapsulate what the book's about. And one of the things that I always do is go back to what the author first said about the book when they approached me. Very, very rarely do I use that when I go out to publishers. Because a lot of authors, you know, they're great at writing a book. They're not great at writing an elevator pitch or a great one-liner. But this one, she'd done a great pitch, and I used a lot of it. I mean, not all of it, and I tweaked it and so on, but I was able to use quite a lot of that when I went out to publishers, because it absolutely did get across the humour and the brilliance of the book. So, and that will make also the editor's life easier, because they can then use that when they're talking and selling it into the rest of their in-house departments, so sales, marketing, publicity, and so on, at an acquisitions meeting. So if you can perfect a good elevator pitch, it is worthwhile. But ultimately, an agent's looking at your writing. Yeah. So it's not vital, because no one's going to say, well, the book's terrific, but blimey, the elevator pitch is dreadful, so I'm not signing them. No. I mean, that's never ever going to happen. Yeah. Whereas you could have the best elevator pitch in the world, but if the book doesn't live up to it, the agent won't sign you. So really, you know, the bottom line is you've just got to write a great book.
The author who did that great pitch,
yes,
how did she do it? Did she have a background in marketing, or did she just, because so much of it is being able to step back and look at your own work and go, oh, that's what it's about, which is a really difficult thing to do.
It is a very difficult thing to do. And as I say, most authors I don't think are very good. I can't do it, you know, or they find it really hard, or they have to, it's not something that comes easily to them. I often say to authors, try and imagine your book as a film. Imagine that you're writing the sort of blurb for the film. Yeah. You know, that guy that always says, you know, they were lost in time.
In a world.
That, you know, imagine that for your book, because it will help you to think of your book in a different way. And that might just remove you enough that you can actually come up with something brilliant. Because it's very, very hard to do when you're so immersed in the whole text. Because the other thing that authors tend to do is they try and put everything in it. And actually it needs to be just a couple of key features. Just
that little hook.
Yeah. And actually the truth is, if you're finding it really, really hard to work out what the hook of your book is, then maybe there's something more that you need to be looking at in the book. Because actually writing a pitch, writing a synopsis that works, that's pithy, that's the other thing that most authors hate doing, is having to write synopsis. Is a really good exercise, because it makes you distill the book down to the really important key features. And if you can't do that, or the book won't let you do that, then that's a sign that maybe there's too much in there, or it's too unwieldy, or it's just not clear enough, or there isn't a clear enough hook, and there's something else there that you need to be exploring.
Little tip, because I did the John York screenplay course, and there was a whole section on writing synopses and treatments for TV and stuff. 5 paragraphs, right? Think of it as 5 acts, 5 paragraphs, with the major turning points at the end of each paragraph. 1 page of paper, and it's such a great exercise, and I would recommend doing it after the first draft of your book, because it really is,
helps you,
really does nail what important stuff is and what what
you need to edit.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a really good idea. We always ask for a one-page synopsis, and that doesn't mean one page where the margins have been pushed out to the edges, and and it's tiny type, to fit it all in. And we do, as an agency, like spoilers. We want the synopsis to be a true synopsis of the story and include any twists and turns. But I know not all agencies do like that. So I do always recommend, look at every agency's individual guidelines before you submit to them. But yeah, I mean, that's a great way of doing it. Think of it as 5 paragraphs. You've got to keep it short and snappy.
Yeah, no, it's funny because my cousin finished his novel this week and he's thinking of sending it out to agents. And he said, what about, and I sent him the treatment and synopsis that I did. I said 5 paragraphs. And I basically said, tell them the ending, spoil the ending for them, because they've read everything before, I mean, it'd be nice.
And also we don't always read the synopsis first. I mean, what I often do is I just dive straight into the book, straight into the writing, because I want to see how good the writing is. And if the writing's not good, then I know that it's a no for me anyway. But if the writing is good and I'm enjoying it, that is when I will sometimes then, when I've read sort of 3 or 4 chapters and I'm thinking this is really good, that's when I might then turn to the synopsis to see how does the overall story arc hold up. The writing's great, so far it's good, but how is this going to develop? Is it going to work through a whole book, rather than just 4 chapters? So that's what I use the synopsis for. And every agent's different in that, and I know others may use it differently, but that's why I want the spoilers, the twists, the turns, the ending, everything, because I'm using that to get a sense of the whole book.
That's really interesting to know. I've got some questions from our listener, Julian Barr. Julian is in Australia and can't be with us on the live show tonight, which I know he's gutted about, but he sent us a few questions here. Julian has written a book. He's written The Way Home, which is his first in a trilogy based on Virgil's epic poetry, Ashes of Olympus, The Way Home, and it's really cool, some very Caroline Lawrence. So,
yeah, wonderful.
And he's in Australia, but he said, how common is it for agents to take on international clients? And is it necessarily in an author's best interest to sign with an agent overseas? I imagine each country has its quirks. So if he's in Australia, should he be looking at American agents, UK agents, or should he get a base in Australia first?
I think, again, it varies. Especially being based in Australia, the world's oyster in a way, because it's English language speaking. So he could go with an agent from the UK, America, or Australia. Likewise, we sign a lot of American authors. We sell directly in the US and in the UK. So we have UK authors and American authors on our books. We would have no problem at all in signing a German author if they were writing in English, because obviously I say obviously, but it's not obvious, but we can't speak German, sadly. So we only represent writers who are writing in English first and foremost. But obviously he's probably writing in English, so he could have an agent from anywhere in the world. I think there are advantages to having an agent in your home country, particularly in the UK, because the UK is small enough that the chances are you probably could engineer a meeting, which is really quite useful, because sometimes it is nice to sit down and talk about a manuscript together in person. In America, that's much less common. Authors often don't ever meet their agents because, they could be living so far away. I mean, most agents are based in New York, not always the case, but often. And, the author could be anywhere. So very, very often in the States, they don't meet their agent. So for them, signing with a UK agent makes no difference because they probably wouldn't meet their agent anyway. And probably the same with Australia, because Australia is pretty huge. So I think in the UK, I would say it's quite useful to have a local, a UK-based agent, because you have got that advantage, that possibility of meeting up. But actually nowadays, you've got Skype, we've got phones, we've got everything. We can communicate really successfully. So there's nothing to stop you having an international agent.
That's great. Funnily enough, Incan Sage says, I'm so glad Julian asked that. South Africa doesn't have agents at all. Like I said earlier, I've been wondering about that international agency thing too. Belle says the same thing. I've dug around and only found one agent in my entire province, and she's very particular about what she represents. So yeah, it's a common problem.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that about South Africa. I mean, I had assumed that most countries would have their own agents. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing to stop you reaching out to American agents and UK agents.
Absolutely. And Julian asks as well, do agents look favourably upon a history of small press publication, totally asking for a friend?
Yes and no. Yes, I think on the whole, it's certainly no bad thing, particularly if you've got good sales figures, because that can really work in your favour. What is more difficult is if you have, what is quite tricky for an agent is if somebody has self-published and then decides they want an agent or they want to be published in a traditional way, because most publishers won't look at something once it has been self-published unless it has sold in the hundreds of thousands, you know. And if it's a phenomenon like that, then of course, you know, they'd be foolish not to be interested. So that's more of a problem. But a history of small press publishing, provided what you're coming with now is new and fresh and hasn't been previously published, is not an obstacle in any way. So yeah, that's great.
I mean, I would say the same applies. We at Garlands have just signed a guy, and it's not been announced yet, but I know he's one of our listeners. And he's self-published in fantasy, and he's just signed a 3-book deal with it. But that's for all new books. That's for completely new books. So they're not going to take on the stuff you've already done.
No, it needs fresh.
Done.
And they take the view, not entirely unreasonably, that since it's been published, even if only self-published, it's been available on Amazon. You know, anybody who wanted it could have bought it. So they feel that there's limited mileage for them in taking it, repackaging it and republishing it, which I'm sure is not always true, but there is some truth in that. So they're always looking for something fresh. It's one of the reasons we've not gone with a major publisher with Back to Reality, the book that Mark and I wrote, because we made such a splash on day one. We were in #1 in 10 categories. And then we went to publish and they said, You've done it all. And we're like, no, but you could put it in supermarkets. Yes.
Like, yeah, we could, but we're not.
And that is it, you know, because they're always looking to, obviously, they're a business, you know, all these publishers, they are businesses first and foremost, and they're looking to maximise sales. So if you've already done a lot of it, which you obviously had, you know, I think 50 Shades of Grey is an example, isn't it? Something that was self-published and, you know, went on to be so successful that publishers, you know.
But that changed a lot between the self-published version and the published version, as far as I know. So
that's interesting.
And moving into the 21st century, we talk a lot on the podcast about hybrid authors. That is, authors who are published traditionally and are published indie as well. Is that something you're seeing? I mean, I guess with children's, you've got fewer authors actually going the indie route because it's a bit more difficult.
Yes, I mean, that's a really interesting thing. I think that quite often within children's, you see people self-publishing if they haven't been successful with the traditional publishing route. Or, and it is one of the lovely things about self-publishing, of course, is that you can do that now. And some books go on to be really successful through self-publishing. So, you know, the traditional old-fashioned way of being published is not the only way, and that's a great thing. Or you see in children's people going for self-publishing when they have done that in the past, and then as a result there's been enough interest and it's snowballed and they've got a traditional publisher. So it's unusual in children's. I don't know if this happens a lot in adult, to have it both going simultaneously.
There are a couple of authors who it tends to be where they've changed genre or maybe changed their name slightly. So they keep one name for indie and they might write, say, unicorn romance or something. And then they come to us and they write, you know, hard bitten crime thrillers under a different name. Okay, and that makes complete sense. But yes, I'm not aware of that happening extensively in children's. In the children's world. Inconsasia has a question. Now, you may be biased on this, but do you think it's important that an agent will have editing skills as well? Not necessarily. No, I think it depends on the author and what they're looking for. I think it's a useful thing because editors are increasingly overloaded nowadays. I mean, they are so busy. I think they have less time. I mean, I know that by the time I left, I had less time for editing than I'd had when I'd started in the industry many years previously. And I think editors now have even less time than that. You know, so if the agent can do some of that editorial work and can submit a manuscript to a publisher that is already in great shape,
it makes everything easier for that editor. They can instantly visualize it as a book. When they're selling it into the other departments, it's easier for the other departments to see it as a book and to get on board and to get excited about it. It means that that book maybe has more chance of being picked up as a lead title, because everyone, the editor is not asking sales and marketing to take a huge leap of faith in where they're going to get it. They can see that it's already, nearly there. So being able to do some of that editorial work up front with your agent, I think, is a really useful thing. But it is not a prerequisite. It's not vital for an agent to have those skills. If they don't have those skills, so they will maybe be looking for books which are in better shape to start with, and authors who are maybe better at editing, self-editing. No,
it's interesting because a friend of mine is represented by Juliet Mushins.
Oh, lovely, Juliet.
And she's been fantastic. She has put his book through she's had a proper hard edit.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I think he had his first meeting. I tweeted today, he said, I had my first meeting with her a year ago.
Yeah.
And now the book is just going out.
Yes.
So that's what she's done. And she's transformed the book completely. So.
And that's really common. I mean, we've got a few like that. There's sometimes, one of the joys of doing what I do now is that I can, it's my business. If I want to pick up an author who I think is really raw, but where I see a real spark of talent, I can do that in a way that was harder to do as a publisher when you know that book's got to be ready in a certain amount of time and has got to go out on the shelves. Now, as an agent, I can take the person on, work with them, and send it out when it's ready, and I can give them the time that they need.
Yeah.
Obviously there is a big cost to the agent in doing that because we don't get any money for doing all of that work. We only get money if we sell the book. So we have to believe that through doing all of that work, we will make a sale and it will be worthwhile for us and for our author. So we never know. It is a gamble. It is a gamble. And I've taken on authors where I've thought, this is a sure thing. I'm sure I'm going to sell them. That they're amazing. They're brilliant. And their book hasn't sold for one reason or another. And I've taken on authors where I thought, this is a bit of a long shot, but I like it, so I'm going to take a punt, on this author. And I've had publishers fighting over it. So you never, you usually have a pretty good idea, but you never know. And the market and publishers, never cease to surprise us with what will happen.
And at the other end of that scale, because my agent is not an editorial agent at all. And I knew that going out. I spoke to a couple of people who were read by him and they said, no, you won't get copious notes, but he'll do a great deal. He's really, really good on the deal. And that really appealed to me. So I recently finished a middle grade book and I sent it to him and I got a few paragraphs back, but I like meaty notes. So what I've done, I've paid Karen Ball actually, it's Karen. I've sent it to Karen. And I said, give it a good kicking. Yeah. And so I'm waiting for that to come back. And I'm really scared. But I know that she'll give me the kind of notes.
Editorial support.
Yeah, exactly. So that hopefully.
So that is always an option for you. If you are with an agent who's not particularly editorially focused and you have critique partners or people who will give you useful feedback. Obviously be careful because you may have great friends who are great readers. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll give you great edits. So you do need to just be careful, but there's lots of options there, and lots of authors have author friends who are very savvy, so you can help each other. We've talked on the podcast before about getting a sort of a peer group who will be able to give you good, honest, objective criticism. We've got about sort of 10 minutes left, so shall we do a quick fire round? Yes, let's do a quick fire round. That sounds exciting.
Are children's books reactive to trends?
Yes. We try not to be. We try to tell authors don't be reactive to trends, because before you know it, the trend's moved on and your book's still not published because the publishing process takes a long time. But it is. There's no two ways about it.
Okay. Actually, quick fire round to one side. Incan Sage has asked a great question. Is there anything, apart from the book just not being in your wheelhouse, that makes you put a submission into the no pile straight away? If it's written in crayon or something like that.
Not really. Only, sometimes if the author is rude in their covering email, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly rare, but does happen, or a bit brusque, or comes across as rather entitled, which is a word that's cropped up a lot recently for some reason, that will really put us off. We need to feel that the person that we would be signing, we can work with them and that they're collaborative, basically.
Right.
That's about the only thing I can think of that would make us put something in the no pile, other than the writing, not being.
If,
terrific.
dear listener, you want to hear how not to write a letter to an agent, go to episode 16. We spoke to the agent Federica Leonardis, and we read out the most amazing, terrible letter from
Really?
us. Yeah, and
I'm going to need to hear this.
It went around all the agents for. It wasn't a children's. And it's kind of famous within the community.
Wow.
It was incredible. So yeah, episode 16. How do I get an agent? Check that one out because it's really good fun. So yes, Belle says I remember that letter. It was awful. It really was.
Well, it's very rare that we get things like that, but occasionally we do. And needless to say, we're not stupid. If it's that bad, we're not going to ask for trouble.
No, quite indeed. Now, where do you draw the line between middle grade and YA? When does middle grade become YA, or is there a weird middle ground? Are you able to draw a line between the two?
Not really. People have struggled with this for a long time. I mean, basically, they're middle grade. Once your protagonist gets beyond about 13, you're probably getting into what we'd call teen territory. Right. And there is this middle ground, because YA tends to be more top end. When we talk about YA, we're thinking of things like Leigh Bardugo, authors who are writing at the very top end of teen, Twilight, the Hunger Games, these things that have crossed over, also sometimes called crossover, where adults are reading them too.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but we had a report come in the office today that said that people lose interest in YA at about the age 35.
Yeah, there you are. Yeah. So, I mean, Twilight was read extensively by adults, and we all know that. And a lot of the YA books on the shelves are read, by me, and I love them. And and a lot of grown-ups. So, I think that YA is in some ways a bit of a misnomer. Or maybe it's just people who are young at heart. But either way, it tends to be the upper end of teen. Yeah. And there is this area that is often called teen or tween, which is between middle grade and YA. So it's for those kids who are maybe 12 to 15 who want to read about a hero who's maybe 15. And it's what we call teen rather than YA. It's not quite, so it's not dealing with abuse or very dark issues. It's quite safe. It's also sometimes called clean teen, because it's kind of dealing with teen issues and first love and things like that, but in a very safe, non sort of controversial way. But not everyone uses these terms. No. They're very variable, and not all the booksellers know where to shelve them on the bookshelves. So teen and clean teen is a slightly problematic area. Yes,
I can tell that from experience. Robot Overlords, which features a 15-year-old protagonist, is available for teens everywhere.
Yes.
It's not clean.
Well, and this is the thing, all these rules are made to be broken. And,
yes, I broke most of them. Do you market to kids or their parents?
I don't market to anyone because I'm an agent, but publishers will market to both. And it does depend on the book, and it depends on the age group, really. I mean, when it's the younger the child, the more likely they are to be marketing to parents and grandparents. Obviously, when it's YA, they're marketing direct to the reader because it's the people with buying power. That's who they're marketing
Absolutely.
to.
It goes back to the age ranging thing we were talking about earlier. How much do school visits help an author?
A lot. I really recommend school visits. If you're happy to do them, get out there, get into the schools, talk about your book. For a start, you can sell quite a lot of copies on a school visit, and that really pushes the needle on your sales figures and pleases your publisher and makes everybody very happy. It also generates buzz. It gets people talking about your book, and kids at one school where you've done an event, maybe talking about the book with kids at another school, so it does spread the word and it does build buzz. So I really heartily recommend school visits.
Brilliant. Any tips if you want to be published by the big six, the big boys?
No, the same tips that I would give you for being published by anybody. You've got to write a great book, have a great concept, speak to your reader.
Okay, fantastic. Is there something that you wish children's authors did more of?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I wish they would read more of what's selling. Some of them are brilliant at this and are really supportive of each other's works, and there are great networks on Twitter of children's authors who read each other's stuff and are really supportive, and it's great. And they are often those authors who are the best at their job and who are selling the best. And I don't think that's a coincidence. You know, they are immersed in this world and they are passionate about it. And they really know their readership and their market. And they get out there into the schools all the time, as we were just talking about. And it is their passion. And there is no doubt that those people who are that invested and that in touch write the best books.
We had, I think Karen Ball talked about this when she was on the show, when she says that she knows full well when someone sends her a book and the last children's book they read was when they were a child in the 70s.
Yeah. We get a lot of those submissions. Yeah, and you know, sadly, it's not going to be great.
No. Okay.
Well, sometimes it's great, but it's just old-fashioned.
Yeah.
You know, it reads in an old-fashioned way, and you know that it's not going to work in today's market, and that's the problem.
I mean, the thing I read middle grade and YA, and so often they're wonderfully paced, and then you come across something. Oh, we can do that. We can get away with that, in a way that we might not have been able to in the 70s. And there are other things that we did in the 70s.
Yeah, that we'd never get away with.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it does vary. Times change, and this is why it's so important. In whatever job you're doing, you look at you learn. You don't go and try and build a building if you're not an architect or a builder. You have to have some expertise, and I think you don't write a children's book just because you read one once. You really do need to know your stuff. And love and be passionate about your market. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, let's copy Enid Blyton, says Belle. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Lashings of ginger beer, says Sage. It's not a good idea, is it? I mean, those are timeless classics, but even those. We've already got Enid Blyton.
Well, they've been tweaked and changed over the years, haven't
absolutely, and revised to be a bit more up to date and so on. Yeah.
No, absolutely, no question. Okay, well, we are almost there. Where can we find you online? www.skylark-literary.com is our website, and everything is there. I'm on Twitter at Amber Caravéo. My lovely colleague Jo is on Twitter at Joanna Malt. We also have at Skylark Lit. So that's us. Wonderful. And if there's a children's author out there looking to submit to, what sort of stuff are you looking for? Oh, anything and everything. Great writing. That's all we want. Just the best writing. Well, yeah, that should be simple, shouldn't it? No pressure. You can find us online. We're on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is at BestsellerXP. We're also on Pinterest. I've just updated our Pinterest boards as well. If you've had a book published, be it indie or trad, we can put it on our board, which is Books by Our Listeners. We're very happy to put stuff up on there. And don't forget to buy our book, Back to Reality, available on Kindle now. And leave us a review. We love hearing what you think. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, it's been a pleasure. There's still our absolute pleasure. There's still some light out there, so you can still enjoy the summer solstice. Yeah. So thank you so much, Amber. Pleasure. And thank you to everyone who joined us on the live show today. Thanks for coming. And all your questions. It's been absolutely brilliant. It's one of those things where you have some questions, you think this is going to last the hour, and we're actually running out of time. So, but yes, thank you, folks. If you want to be part of this, if you want to get onto the live show and interact with our guests each month, then pop over to Patreon, Patreon.com/Bestseller Experiment, become one of our chart topper supporters, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.